You all for joining us for today's Tiger Tuesday. We're very excited to welcome today Brian Gribben. Now, Brian, I'm going to have to read your title because there's no way I can remember all of this. Brian is the coordinator of government documents and special collections at Forsyth Library here at Fort Hays State University. So, Brian, thank you so much for joining us. What I'd like to do is start by having you tell us your Fort Hays story. What brought you here, and just what your background is with Fort Hays State.
Okay, well, thank you for having me. I came to FHSU in 1995 as a freshman political science major and was one of the last students of Dr. Don Slechta and had a fantastic experience during my time. Upon graduation, I went into juvenile justice and spent about 6 to 7 years roughly doing that, and it has kind of a short shelf life. For me, in 2007, I decided I wanted to come back just out of curiosity and get a second bachelor's in history. I liked it so much, I stayed for my MA. And upon completing that, I went to the University of Nebraska-Lincoln, where I completed my doctoral coursework and comped, and then came back to Haze thinking I would be here in the short term to just, make some money for a research trip to work on the dissertation. Took a position at Forsyth Library that was initially going to be 6 months max. When that 6 months was up, Dean Deb Ludwig asked me if I would be interested in becoming a program specialist and overseeing the government documents program as well as the special collections. And, we talk a lot about FHSU being a family and campus being home, and I share that sentiment because 5 years later, I'm here. I couldn't be happier, and I find the work that I'm doing just so meaningful. So.
Well, so tell us what someone with that big long title that you have actually does.
Well, some days it seems like I'm just getting things off the top shelf in the archives for other people. No, what I do in both areas, in government documents, since we are a selective repository in the Federal Depository Library Program, the FDLP, I ensure that we maintain compliance by ensuring access to like a core set of materials, as well as cultivating and curating items that are germane to this specific region. So congressional materials having to do with agriculture, small business development, materials that are relevant to the research interests of the university, particularly in geosciences, education, public health. So that's one side of it. And then with the special collections, which initially was kind of the secondary component of my position, that's began to become all-encompassing just because of some of the fantastic materials we've been able to get in the last 4 years. I work with donors to ensure proper dispensation of the materials and ensure that we have the facilities and materials needed to properly curate them. I work on exhibit development in conjunction with several of our fantastic staff, University Archivist Amber Watts, longtime special collections guru Patty Nicholas, and a fantastic outreach team, Cindy Landis and Brittany Squire. And what we do, COVID's kind of thrown a wrench in all of that because we've had to set aside our on-campus exhibits due to the environmental conditions. We want to maintain the integrity of our materials, and so we've segued from doing on-site exhibits to developing digital exhibits. And I can show you a few of those here in just a moment. So.
We definitely want to see that. Before we get to that, though, you mentioned COVID, and I know that one of the projects that you're involved with right now is trying to gather materials related to how the university is responding to the COVID pandemic. I don't know how often you've had the opportunity to do that in your work, but I'm wondering first of all, how that's going, and then also what criteria do you use to determine, hey, this is something kind of big, I should probably try to, archive this while it's happening so that we have this for future generations?
Okay, good question. What I noticed when I began reviewing the contents of especially the university archives, there are these pivotal transitional moments in time that seem to go unaddressed. Those gaps in the university history's record, say in the aftermath of 9/11, say from a lot of the good work done by the staff of the university leader. There wasn't a real effort to try to capture oral histories of students and faculty during the Afghan and Iraqi wars, which were ongoing. So with the pandemic, we wanted to make sure that this moment in time was captured, especially how it affects not just faculty, students, and staff in how they live their personal lives, how it affects their teaching, but we also invited members of the entire surrounding community, as well as alumni, to submit, their stories. And it doesn't have to be, long descriptive monologues about, this is how it affects, this part of my day, this part of my day. It's completely subjective, whatever they want to share. The materials coming in, it comes in fits. We might go a week without getting anything. We've basically set up a online Google form that can be found at a special collections site online, as well as we invite contributors to just email us directly at scforsyth@fhsu.edu. But we've been amassing a kind of a wide variety of contributions, some from healthcare professionals in the community, some from small business owners, not as many from alum as I'd like to see, so nudge, nudge, but a lot of good work from staff, from faculty and some of those students. And once we began sorting through all of that and begin to contextualize it, we'll begin putting it out there, not only just for researchers to come in and look at the materials themselves, but incorporate them into online exhibits, something that can be shared with a wider audience.
Well, we will certainly, from our office's perspective, start working on archiving some of our, certainly, homecoming is an entirely different beast this year than normal years, as we talked about last week on this program. So we'll do better from the Alumni Association perspective, Brian, I promise.
Thank you.
We will put our thoughts together and get that over to you for sure. Because I'm sure that what I'm thinking now is going to be super valuable to researchers, in the coming years. So going to really want to know what I was thinking about all this. No, kidding. Okay, so I know that you have pulled up some examples of the digital side of the archives that you wanted to share. So I'm just going to turn it over to you and let you share some of the things that you have. I'm very excited to hear about this.
Okay, thank you. So special collections, we have several main areas of concentration, and within these areas we begin to collect materials that speak to that larger theme. So we have, of course, the university archives, which captures the past and present of the university, documenting things as mundane as minutes from faculty senate to the personal papers of faculty. As well as just, the memorabilia that makes FHSU FHSU. We've digitized the university reveille going back to its initial publication in 1914, which is available on the Scholars Repository, the Archives Online section of the Scholars Repository. We have the University Leader digitized online. And let me go ahead and I can share my screen with you. And just to confirm, everybody should see our special collections webpage. Is that correct, Skip? Yes, good. I never quite know what I'm doing with Zoom, so I didn't want you to see a nice screenshot of Yellowstone instead of the page. So in special collections from our splash page, you can see or areas of concentration. We have the classic children's literature that we began to develop recently after a fantastic, generous gift from the Fenwick family. Lynn and Lily are kind of hidden on my Zoom grid, but for those of you who don't know, we'll be receiving the Wizard of Oz collection at some point. These are first edition Wizard of Oz books, as well as memorabilia. In addition to the classic children's literature collection, we have contributions from Nancy Vogel. We have multilingual editions of children's classic fairy tales. And then I've begun collecting in the recent past probably 15 months, Whitman Publishing books. For those of you old enough to remember the Whitman Publishing Company, it licensed famous characters, people like Annette Funicello, characters like Hopalong Cassidy, and published, children's books, very descriptive, very colorful, which we've begun to collect. The Center for Ethnic Studies is kind of a codicil to our Great Plains collection area. Ethnic Studies contains genealogical materials and primary source documents related to the denizens of Ellis County, the Germans from Russia who helped settle, as well as the exodustrial community of Nicodemus. We have materials from Nicodemus and some of the surrounding areas as well. And we look to expand that and begin incorporating materials from communities from especially Southwest Kansas, where so many of our students come from, but we certainly, that's a gap in our collection. The Great Plains research, we have primary source materials as well as hard to find secondary sources related to largely the Great Plains as a geographic region, more specifically in Kansas, but we of course branch out, and we have these broken down in chronological periods. We have the Great Plains, the populist era, Great Plains of the Great Depression, and Great Plains today. Related to the Great Plains, we have, let me find it, some outstanding collections donated by a gentleman that's with us today, Tim Johnson of Wichita, Kansas. Tim has been a longtime friend of Special Collections and has donated not only maps from the territorial period of Kansas, but these fantastic Kansas postcode collections. Last homecoming, Tim gave a fantastic presentation on his collection, highlighting some real gems that we had. And just a few weeks ago, Amber Watts and I, this was before we did get permission from the provost to travel, but we went to Wichita and had just a fantastic day with Tim, going over his latest donation, which is almost a compendium of postcodes from every community in Kansas you could find, alphabetized from, I think Alton, Kansas to Zurich, basically. And these real photo postcodes are almost the Instagram of the time, of the early 1900s, in which, that's an actual photograph developed on postcode stock, and looking at them, you can actually trace the evolution and in some cases the devolution of a lot of these communities, from thriving early 20th century communities to ghost towns or unincorporated communities. We are in the process of well, no pun intended, but processing the latest contribution from these collections. And we've been working with several specific sub-collections to develop digital exhibits that we'll have up shortly. Another area of collection is the military history. This was largely due to a large donation given to us in the early 2000s by an alum, Cecil B. Curry. He had gone on, he did his undergraduate work at FHSU, later going on to obtain a PhD, and he was a longtime faculty member at the University of South Florida. Dr. Curry, his primary focus of research was on Edward Lansdale. And for those of you who don't know, Lansdale was an officer in the USAF, but more specifically, he was an asset of the CIA. And in the 1950s and 1960s, he helped develop what's known as COIN, counterinsurgency techniques, specifically in the Philippines and in South Vietnam. And in the Curry collection, I'll just highlight this, we have digitized just a wealth of interviews that Dr. Curry did with Lansdale and some of the members of Lansdale's team, which it's almost, it's interesting because they're almost nonchalant in discussing some pretty infamous aspects of U.S. foreign policy and U.S. intervention in East Asia. Included is an interview with Daniel Ellsberg, and it's kind of the Pentagon Papers fame. You'll see CIA Director William Colby. It's interesting to hear how some of Lansdale's team talks about Daniel Ellsberg, just kind of lamenting that he had destroyed a promising career by leaking the Pentagon Papers. Very insightful, very intriguing materials. And these are all available to stream online. And then you see the Fenwick smiling faces. We have the University Archives itself. And the University Archives, of course, has some of the materials I mentioned earlier accessible through, let me scroll on down here. Up. Our archives online in the Scholars Repository. And here you can find digital surrogates of many of the materials we have in the archives itself, things like athletic programs, the reveillees that I mentioned, the university leaders, minutes from faculty senate, and we have a collection of past on-site exhibits. And I'll flip over because I have something pulled. So for example, on the main floor of the library, we typically have several exhibits running concurrently. And our main exhibit typically has materials that are unique, but merit less preservation concern. In what we call our walkthrough gallery, the special collections gallery, we have materials that, due to the, fragility, have to be kept in archival quality cases and be cycled out fairly quickly. So in September 2018 through January 2019, we had the Memories and Memorabilia exhibit, looking at the traditions and history of FHSU. Now you can go to this site and view the images themselves. And we have some pretty neat things. We had some pretty neat things on display. Why is that not coming up? It's just taking a minute. We have things like old Tiger pennants and the infamous beanies. I don't know if many of you are aware that at one point, Skip's laughing, at one point in time, if a underclassman was caught on campus without their beanie, they would be subject to some form of punishment by the upperclassmen. So this was one of the things Dr. Kim Perez's learning communities, the Tiger tradition community, discovered when doing some research in the archives. But I would invite all of you to kind of peruse the on-site exhibits. And then also within the university archives, we have online exhibits. And that includes oral histories that have been conducted over the past 3 years with notable faculty, alumni, and so on, including Larry and Lynn Fenwick, Tim Johnson, and a host of other notables. And if any of you might be interested in participating in this project, we even though COVID has certainly complicated things, we'd encourage you to reach out to myself, Cindy Landis, Charlene, and we can make it happen.
I love the Tiger Tales project. Let me just say, I think it's great. We've been trying to, some of these folks look probably younger than you might expect, and that's because we've been trying to capture our Torch and Pilot and Lighthouse, especially Torch and Lighthouse recipients, so outstanding undergraduate and outstanding graduate students of the prospective classes, trying to catch those while they're here to tell their stories, because clearly they've done something amazing if they're winning these awards. So some of those younger folks, we definitely, they're some of our more recent award recipients. And I just think that this is such a great project. I love it. And I'm happy to help. And I can certainly steer any of you to the fine folks at Forsyth to get these done.
Okay. Well, I could continue going on. We have some just fantastic gems and special collections. We are available for appointments, even despite the COVID, if you want to come in and do research on your own or contact us with inquiries. We are trying to adjust and make more materials available online. Elizabeth Downing, our digital curation librarian, has almost completed digitizing the Dodge City Police docket from its wild Cowtown days, with entries by luminaries like Bat Masterson and of course Wyatt Earp. That should be coming online in total fairly soon. We always have, we're always getting in fascinating contributions. We've been in touch with Skip Ward over the past several months, and he's been, just so helpful in discussing his experiences working with the State Department and in the Foreign Service and Southeast Asia and other areas, and has been so generous with his time. And we just really encourage you to reach out to us with questions, with comments, with ideas.
So Brian, this might be like asking you to pick a favorite child, but do you have a favorite item in the collection that just really speaks to you?
I do. It is like picking a favorite child. There's several. The Lansdale collection I find fascinating only because it provides a window into a really controversial moment in U.S. history, and it humanizes the major players. These are not individuals who were absent any kind of scruples. They had their own sense of their own values, their own objectives, and it involved some pretty unsettling things. And to hear them discuss it, it kind of provided a window into how people can compartmentalize themselves. That was one. The second is we came into possession of some just fantastic German language Bibles that we had on display. I believe it was fall of 2018. They're somewhat dissimilar. We have the Sauer Bibles, which were the first Bibles printed in a European, non-English European language in the colonies. These were printed in the 1770s. We have two editions, and they are pretty hard to find because they were printed in Germantown, Pennsylvania, and of course during the Revolutionary War, a lot of the story is kind of apocryphal, but supposedly a lot of the paper goods were destroyed, to be used as wadding for cannon and for munitions. So we have those, as well as what's called an Elector Bible from the 17th century. It was published, I believe, printed in the 1680s. And again, the wood plates, the imprints made by the wood blocks are very illustrative. It's very beautiful in Gothic script. So those would be two of the main items that I find pretty fascinating, pretty intriguing. So, and I guess I'll add another one. I know we're short on time, but as I began collecting these these books from the Whitman Publishing House, there's a bit of nostalgia that goes in with that, because as a child, my dad would take me out to the shop to do, sweep shop, mow, paint fences, things like that while he was out in the field. And I get done with my work and go into the house and paw through his old collections and find just a wealth of all these Whitman books. And, I'd kind of sneak them out and try to kill some time until he got back in from the field. So those are fun as well. And yeah, so.
So we do have some questions, and I know Patty has already has answered one, but I'm just going to bring it up anyway.
Okay.
The question was, what about early Haze newspapers?
Okay, early Haze newspapers, we have the Haze City Republican and the Haze Free Press and others. We have those digitized and available through several different databases we subscribe to, as well as on microfilm in the library's general collection.
And are those early newspapers in English?
Say that again, please.
Are those early newspapers in English?
Yes, they are. I haven't come across any German language newspapers from Ellis County. That's not to say they don't exist, and Patty would probably be the better person to ask on that. But these are all English language.
Okay. All right. I was just curious about that. That was a me question, not a question from the audience. Patty says she's not seen any German papers, so maybe they were all just, English. Another question: what is the mission statement, i.e., the collections management scope?
Well, a scope is simply those content areas that I described earlier. Our mission is to curate and preserve these specialty materials that are not just, have monetary value, but have scholarly value as well, and that aren't readily available through other institutions.
This is not a question, but Cindy Landis, who of course is one of your colleagues at Forsyth, when I was at the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C., the special collections librarian I was talking with picked the Sauer Bibles as his favorite piece in their collection. So lots of FHSU pride that we have these in our collection.
Yes.
So thank you for sharing that, Cindy. So I'm wondering if there are other questions. I think those are the questions that we have in the chat. Does anyone want to unmute yourself and ask a question of Brian? And I can't, you're just going to have to ask because I can't see everyone if there is someone who has a question. So if not, let me just say, I love that Kit Kat beanie. That is not your standard Fort Hays beanie. I thought that's amazing, and I kind of want to sneak in and sneak it out somehow. I'm sure I'm not allowed to do that, but I just think that is amazing. And now it's on tape, but I like it.
Well, you can come in and look with your eyes, not your hands. So.
BJ Reed wants to know, what is the linkage to the Sternberg Museum?
Okay, the Sternberg Museum, of course, is famous for its collections of natural history materials. What we have in the University Archives is the personal papers of George F. Sternberg, as well as things like his family scrapbooks put together by his assistant and the former director of the Sternberg, Merle Walker, that basically document their paleontology excavations, both in western Kansas, the Badlands, and so on. We also have glass plate negatives that were taken by Dr. Wooster of some of these trips as well. So there's a lot of crossover there. And we also have the paleotypes of some of the materials that we share back and forth with the museum itself.
Isn't that picture that looks upon the quad through the Pickin pillars, is that from Dr. Wooster's collection? It's a black and white. Do you know the picture I'm talking about? It's kind of one that you see a lot.
Mm-hmm.
In my understanding, I was told by someone, maybe it was Patty, back in the day, that it was taken by someone leaning out one of the, on the side window of Pickin and looking down through the pillars onto the quad.
I'm trying to visualize.
He says yes, it is from
the
Dr.
photo. Okay, well, we'll take Patty's word for it because she knows as well as anyone. So.
And now I'm going to have to find it and post it as part of this video recap because it's one of my favorite Fort Hays pictures for sure. And I love the idea that someone, like they're probably someone holding him on the inside of the building, and as the other person's like leaning out and, trying to take the picture. I love it. Oh, Nancy Vogel says that her great-grandfather bought some land near Lawrence from a Sternberg, one of the family. So how cool is that? So are there any other questions? Oh, here's one. Are there any FHSU courses that have students do a project with your archived material?
Yes, in fact, Amber and I just worked with Holly Marquez's historical methods students yesterday, and many of them have chosen topics directly related to FHSU, one of which was how the normal school responded to the 1918 Spanish influenza epidemic. And in those instances, the students will be coming in and working with the materials. In years past, the history department offers courses in, public history, specifically museum studies and archival studies, in which the students will come in and work hands-on with the archivists themselves. Additionally, we've been in discussions with Nicholas Simcoe in graphic art and design, and his photography students have periodically come over, and he's worked with them, showing them things like the glass plate negatives of Dr. Wooster. So we're lucky to have a lot of buy-in from some of our faculty.
So Patty is so good. She just sent me a copy of this picture. So I'm going to share my screen quickly and show you all the picture that I'm talking about, which again is from Dr. Wooster's collection. And isn't that all online as well?
That is. The Wooster collection has been digitized and is available in our digital collections.
So that's my favorite Fort Hays photo. I love it. I love the idea, like I said, of someone peeking out from the side of the building, and taking that picture through those pillars, looking on to what is now McCartney, which would have been Forsyth, I think, back at that point, right?
Yes.
And Albertson.
And Albertson. Mm-hmm.
So I just love that picture. So do we have any other questions? Thank you for that, Patty, by the way. You rock as always. If not, I want to thank everyone for joining us. We will have a Tiger Tuesday again in 2 weeks. The topic is to be determined. It will be a pre-homecoming topic. And then, in 4 weeks from now, we will be in the middle of homecoming. So we'll have several opportunities for conversations like this throughout that week. So we hope to see you again. And again, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon.